My name is Nora Ramirez. I am 39 years old, and until 9:12 a.m. last Thursday, I was the lead systems architect at Solara Tech. 10 years of my life sat on that title, a decade of building something from the ground up, and it ended with a 15-minute meeting in an office that wasn't even warm enough to melt the frost in the air between us. Gregory Stanton sat behind his desk, crisp suit, perfect tie-knot eyes, locked on the gleaming watch strapped to his wrist. A Tag Heuer Carrera one I had personally helped choose 3 years ago as a retirement gift for our former CEO. He didn't look at me as he said the words, only at the ticking second hand that seemed more interesting than my career. He started with that phrase everyone in corporate America knows too well: strategic restructuring, as if rearranging org charts and cutting livelihoods could be softened by boardroom vocabulary. His voice was even detached, like he was telling me the lunch menu. He said my specialized position no longer aligned with the new vision. I heard him, but my brain refused to translate it into anything that made sense. I should have argued, should have slammed my hand on the table, but instead I sat there, spine straight, face blank, nodding like we were discussing the weather instead of him erasing a decade of my work. My eyes stayed on him, waiting for some flicker of discomfort, some sign that he felt the weight of what he was doing. Nothing. The man could have been a mannequin reading a script. The hum of the HVAC filled the space between us, and I found myself staring at the leather band of his watch, remembering how I had gone out of my way to get it engraved. A small gesture for a boss I respected then. It felt like the final insult now, watching it catch the light, while he dismantled my career without so much as a pause. When he finished, there was no handshake, no thank you for my service. Just a nod toward the door, and a mention that HR would handle the details. My legs felt wooden as I stood, but my voice came out steady when I told him I understood. I didn't, not really. Not how 10 years of missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and 3 a.m. emergency calls could vanish with a corporate catchphrase. I walked out without another word, holding myself upright because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. The hallway outside his office felt colder than I remembered. Faces I had known for years turned away, suddenly fascinated by their screens. No one wanted to make eye contact with the woman marked for exit. I passed framed photos of project launches I had been instrumental in, patents with my name still etched on them, and it all felt like looking at someone else's life. The elevator ride down was silent, and I caught my own reflection in the polished metal. Calm, composed, not at all the storm raging in my chest. In the lobby, I paused, wondering if I should make a scene, tell everyone exactly what kind of leader Gregory was. But I didn't. Maybe part of me still believed there was dignity in quiet exits. Or maybe I just didn't have the energy yet to fight. Outside, the air was sharp, and for a moment, I just stood there breathing it in, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. 10 years at Solara Tech had shaped me, challenged me, and at times nearly broken me, but I had always pushed forward. I had been the one they called when everyone else failed, the one who built the impossible fixes no one thought could work. I had been irreplaceable. Or so I thought. Now, in less than 20 minutes, I was disposable. Just another name in a restructuring memo. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was a numbness, a sort of suspended disbelief that made everything feel far away. I walked to my car in the employee lot, unlocked it, and sat in the driver's seat without turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and I stared out at nothing, the hum of distant traffic blending with the pounding in my ears. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew that the shock wouldn't last, that eventually the weight of it all would crash down. But not yet. Not in that moment. I was still holding on to some thread of composure, some tiny shred of control. And I had no idea that less than 4 hours later, an email would land in my inbox that would change everything, and maybe end Gregory Stanton's career before it had even really begun. I walked back into the office for what I knew would be the last time. My desk sat in the corner of the open floor, the same spot I had claimed years ago, when we were still a scrappy startup. Now it looked smaller, somehow stripped of the energy it once had. I powered on my computer out of habit, the familiar hum feeling almost cruel. Around me, people busied themselves with meaningless clicks and paper's eyes locked to screens. No one wanted to meet my gaze. I started gathering my things, slowly stacking framed photos, tucking away my coffee mug, the one with a fading blueprint of the Aegis framework. My hands moved on autopilot, wrapping cables, folding the hoodie I kept draped over my chair. Maya appeared at my side, her voice low, eyes darting toward the hallway. She told me Gregory was cutting people so he could bring in his old team from Easton Dynamics. Everyone knew it, but no one was saying it out loud. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. It wasn't even about performance. It was about loyalty, just not to the company. I thanked her quietly and kept packing, sliding my laptop into my bag. Then I paused, pulled it back out, and opened the Titan Shield proposal. The encryption section was unfinished, and I knew no one else on the team had the technical background to complete it before the client deadline. Even after what had just happened, I couldn't bring myself to leave it undone. My fingers flew over the keyboard, coding in bursts, refining the architecture until the system passed every security check. I hit save, uploaded the final version to the shared drive, and shut the laptop for good. Maya was still there, shaking her head. She told me I was a better person than she was. I didn't feel better. I just couldn't stand the idea of my work, my reputation being left in shambles because of someone else's bad decisions. I zipped my bag and took one last look at the desk, the stacks of old project binders, the little cactus I'd somehow kept alive for 3 years. The elevator ride down felt longer this time. Outside, the late afternoon light had that washed-out winter quality, cold and tired. I drove home, but didn't get out of the car right away. The garage door was chipped and peeling, and I stared at it like it might offer an answer. I sat there for nearly an hour, engine off the air, inside growing colder. The silence was thick, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. My mind drifted back to my first day at Solara Tech. The CEO at the time, Daniel Monroe, had taken a chance on me, even though I didn't have the perfect degree or the polished resume. During my interview, they threw me a system integration problem that had stumped the team for weeks. I solved it in 45 minutes. Daniel had looked at me like I was exactly what they'd been searching for. "You think differently," he'd said. "We need that." That memory felt like another life now. Back then, everything seemed possible. We were small but fearless, driven by the thrill of solving impossible problems. Somewhere along the way, the culture changed. People like Daniel left, and people like Gregory moved in. I stayed because I believed in the work, in the team, in the impact we were making. I stayed because I thought loyalty mattered. Now, sitting in my driveway, I realized it had only mattered to me. I had barely been home for 3 hours when my laptop pinged with a new email notification. The subject line read, "Urgent contract opportunity. Confidential." For a second, I almost deleted it. It sounded like the kind of spam you get when your resume starts floating around job boards. But the sender stopped me cold. Patrick Hughes, CEO of Hughes Security Solutions, one of Solara Tech's biggest potential clients. My first thought was that it had to be a mistake. There was no way Patrick Hughes knew who I was, much less that I was unemployed, and definitely not within hours of it happening. Still, my curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked. The message was short and direct. He had learned that I was no longer with Solara Tech as of that morning. He wanted to discuss a high-priority contracting opportunity that required my specific expertise. It was time-sensitive. He included his private line. I stared at the words, trying to process them. How did he even know I was gone? It had been less than half a day. The timing was too perfect, almost suspicious. My pulse quickened, part of me exhilarated at the possibility, another part bristling at the implication that I was already being swept into someone else's agenda. I picked up my phone and dialed before I could overthink it. His voice was deep and confident when he answered. He didn't waste time on small talk. He explained that Hughes Security was preparing to award a major security infrastructure contract. Solara Tech was one of 3 finalists. I told him I was aware and that I had been leading the technical aspects of the proposal until that morning. He said that was exactly why he was calling. The proposals from all candidates had been lacking. Only my preliminary design had shown the level of understanding his technical team was looking for. Then he dropped the number. 4 times my Solara Tech salary for 2 months of work. Work from home. Full credit for my design with the intellectual property belonging to Hughes. No middlemen, no corporate politics. It sounded like freedom wrapped in a gold bow. I gripped the phone tightly, fighting the rush of satisfaction that came from knowing my work was valued maybe more than it had ever been at Solara Tech. I asked why me? Why not just push Solara Tech to improve their proposal? He said the truth was simple. The framework I had created Aegis was exactly what they needed. I was the only one who truly understood how to implement it at the scale they required. Without me, Solara Tech's proposal would remain mediocre. With me, Hughes could get the best design possible without paying inflated vendor costs. The flattery was effective, but the implications were sharp. If I accepted, Solara Tech would almost certainly lose the contract. A deal worth millions. A blow to their projections, and by extension to Gregory Stanton's ego. I could practically see his face twisting when the news reached him. That thought was tempting, almost delicious, but it also meant taking deliberate action to harm the company I had poured a decade into, even if they had just discarded me like a broken tool. I told Patrick I needed time to think. He agreed, but made it clear the deadline was noon tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the dark screen of my laptop. The offer was intoxicating in its simplicity. Freedom recognition money. And yet, under it all, the gnawing question lingered. Would this be a step toward my future, or just a beautifully packaged act of revenge I called Maya as soon as I hung up with Patrick? She answered on the second ring, her voice low, like she was hiding in a corner. I asked if she had heard anything about Hughes, and she let out a breath that told me she had. She said Gregory had called an emergency meeting with the board right after lunch. The rumor was that Hughes had suddenly put their contract decision on hold. No one knew why, but Gregory's face was the color of old paper when he came out of the conference room. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. Hughes knew I was out of Solara Tech within hours, and now they were stalling their decision. The timing wasn't just odd, it was surgical. I could almost feel the invisible thread tying the 2 events together. If Patrick was playing some bigger game, I had just become one of his pieces. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long to find a trail. A Bloomberg article from 2 years ago mentioned that Hughes Security had once been in acquisition talks with Easton Dynamics, Gregory's former company. The deal fell apart abruptly, with Hughes citing irreconcilable differences in corporate culture. Buried further down in the article was the real poison. Sources said Hughes walked away because of Easton's aggressive cost-cutting measures under Gregory's leadership. He had slashed entire departments to boost short-term profits before a planned IPO, and Patrick Hughes had wanted no part of it. I sat there staring at the screen, connecting dots that had been scattered hours ago. Gregory's move at Solara Tech wasn't original. It was the same playbook he'd used before. And now, Patrick had a perfect opportunity to hit him where it hurt, without ever firing a shot himself. All he had to do was pluck me from the wreckage and let the rest unravel. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. I had assumed this was about my talent, my work, maybe even my reputation in the industry. But looking at it now, I could see the outlines of something colder. This wasn't just about a contract or a framework. It was about leverage. Patrick had a history with Gregory, and I was the sharp edge of the knife he intended to twist. Part of me felt a flash of satisfaction at the idea of Gregory squirming of him losing the deal and the power he'd been so eager to consolidate. But there was something else, too. Something heavier. The realization that I wasn't steering this situation, I was being steered. and the hands on the wheel belonged to two men who had already proven they valued strategy over people. 2 days after that first call, a courier showed up at my door holding a sleek black box and a padded envelope. Inside was a brand new laptop with Hughes Securities logo etched into the lid and a handwritten note from Patrick thanking me for my time. The envelope contained the contract. It was more than generous. 4 times my old salary for 2 months of work, full ownership of my designs credited to me, and the rights license to Hughes. I could work entirely from home, set my own hours, and take on other projects afterward. It was the kind of offer people fantasize about when they're stuck in cubicles staring at the clock. While I skimmed the details, my phone buzzed. Gregory's name lit up the screen. I let it go to voicemail, but seconds later a text came through. He wanted to talk about misunderstandings. An hour later, another message followed, this time offering my position back with a significant compensation adjustment. I could almost hear his forced charm through the words. It was almost flattering to know how fast the panic had set in, but mostly it was infuriating. The calls kept coming throughout the day, alternating between his cell and an unknown number I knew was his assistant. By the time evening rolled around, I had a dozen unread messages, each one a little more desperate than the last. I closed my phone and went back to the contract. The terms were airtight. No non-compete issues, no restrictions that would tie my hands. Just the work exactly the way I had always wanted to do it without middle managers weighing in on things they barely understood. When I signed and sent the scanned pages back to Patrick, there was a flicker of something in my chest that felt like victory. Not the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem, but the electric rush of winning a round in a fight I hadn't asked for but now intended to finish. It was intoxicating, and I let myself enjoy it for the rest of the night. Later, as I was tucking my son into bed, he studied me with that too perceptive gaze kids have. He asked if I was working for my old company again. I told him, no, I was working for someone new. He tilted his head and asked if this was about getting back at the man who fired me. The question landed harder than I expected. I brushed it off with a vague answer, but the words lingered. After he fell asleep, I sat alone in the living room, replaying his question. Was this just revenge? I wanted to believe it wasn't. That this was about seizing an opportunity, about reclaiming control over my work and my worth. But I couldn't ignore how much I relished the idea of Gregory finding out I had taken the one thing he needed most. The lines between rebuilding and retaliation were starting to blur, and I wasn't sure which side I was standing on. Patrick met me in the marble-floored lobby of Hughes Security, his usual calm, hiding whatever strategy was running through his mind. As we walked toward the glass-walled conference room, I saw him. Gregory, seated at the far end of the table, was flipping through a folder like he belonged there. His suit was sharp, but there was something frayed in his posture, a stiffness that didn't match the man who had so casually ended my career. The room went silent when Patrick introduced me as the consultant leading the architecture design. I walked to the front, plugged in my laptop, and pulled up the first schematic. My voice was steady as I explained each layer of the system, breaking down complex security protocols into terms the executives could follow. Questions came rapid fire, and I answered each one with clarity. I highlighted innovations SolariTech had never proposed, features that anticipated threats before they could breach. When the discussion turned to implementation, I didn't flinch. I recommended a vendor whose team had the specialized expertise required. It wasn't SolariTech. I didn't look at Gregory when I said it, but I felt the weight of his stare. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught the flicker of realization, the slump of shoulders, the twitch of his jaw. For the first time since that morning in his office, the balance of power had shifted. I was no longer the one on the defensive. In that room, with my work on full display and his failure laid bare, the win was mine. When the executives filed out, Patrick closed the door and leaned against the table watching me. Gregory stayed seated, his eyes moving between us like he was piecing something together. I asked Patrick when exactly he had decided to hire me directly. He hesitated, then said it was when he learned I was available. I pressed, wanting to know how he found out so quickly. The answer came without shame. A board member's spouse had mentioned at a charity event that Gregory was planning cuts, starting with high-salaried specialists. The words sank in like ice water. Patrick had known before it happened. He had been ready, waiting for me to hit the market so he could pull me out from under Gregory. The generous offer, the timing, the urgency, it wasn't about rescuing me. It was about using me as a perfectly placed piece in his long game against a man he already wanted to take down. I wasn't the prize. I was the weapon. The silence between the three of us grew heavy. Gregory's jaw was tight, but I could see the flicker of grim satisfaction in knowing he wasn't the only one who played dirty. I gathered my laptop, straightened my shoulders, and told Patrick I would fulfill my contract, but I wasn't his pawn. Then I walked out, head-high heels echoing against the polished floor. The victory I'd felt minutes earlier had curdled into something hollow, and it followed me all the way out into the cold air. A week later, Maya called with the list. 16 names, all specialists with deep institutional knowledge, all set to be cut before the end of the month. I recognized most of them, people who had built the systems that kept Solara Tech running when everything else failed. Seeing those names laid out like casualties on paper lit something in me. I could walk away and let it happen, or I could do something that mattered. I called Daniel Monroe, the former CEO who had hired me all those years ago. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. When I explained Gregory's plan, he let out a slow sigh and said he'd suspected as much. I told him I had an idea, not revenge, but a way to preserve the talent that Gregory saw as expendable. I wanted to create a lean consultancy made up entirely of the people he planned to fire, and then position it to partner with Solara Tech on the Hughes contract. Daniel liked the idea, but warned me it would take buy-in from Patrick. Convincing Patrick turned out to be easier than I expected. He admitted Gregory had misrepresented Solara Tech's capabilities and said he valued stability in his vendors. If my alternative offered both value and the expertise he already trusted, he was interested. By the next day, we were sketching out terms. The company would be called Orion Systems. 16 partners, no corporate fluff, just problem solvers who knew how to deliver. We moved quickly. The legal paperwork was filed within a week. We secured a 3-year service agreement with Hughes, with Solara Tech as the implementation partner. The contract was structured so that Orion would own the designs, Solara Tech would execute them, and Hughes would oversee quality and timelines. Everyone got what they needed except Gregory. The news broke at Solara Tech during an all-hands meeting. Gregory stood in front of the board trying to explain why the Hughes contract was moving forward without his direct control. The board didn't buy it. They announced his removal before the meeting ended, reinstating Daniel as interim executive chair. The room erupted in cautious relief. When Daniel called me afterward, he said the company felt like itself again. The IPO was off the table for now. The focus was back on innovation and people, the things that had made Solara Tech worth building in the first place. For Orion, it was the perfect launch. Our first project was high profile. Our team was motivated, and the industry was paying attention. Standing in our small rented office, watching my new partners set up their workstations, I felt something I hadn't in months. Pride. Not just in what we had built, but in how we had chosen to build it. We had taken a story that started with loss and turned it into something stronger. Gregory was gone, but more importantly, the people he tried to discard had a new home and a new future we were shaping together. 6 months later, Orion was thriving. We had completed 3 major projects ahead of schedule and under budget, and our client list was growing faster than I had dared to hope. The team was tight-knit, every voice valued, every contribution recognized. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that reflected not just my skills, but my values. Life outside of work felt different, too. I was home for dinner most nights. I could take my son to school in the mornings without rushing through traffic with one hand on my coffee and the other on my phone. The constant knot of tension in my chest was gone. I had traded the illusion of security for the reality of autonomy, and it fit me better than I ever imagined. Looking back, I realized that the day Gregory fired me was not the end of anything important. It was the start of something I never would have chosen for myself, but desperately needed. Value is not defined by a job title or the approval of someone in a corner office. It lives in the work we choose to do, the people we choose to stand beside, and the standards we refuse to compromise. So if you've been cut loose, overlooked, or told you don't belong, I want you to hear this. Sometimes a door closes because you were meant to build your own. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving them wrong, it's proving yourself right. Strategic realignment can sound cold and corporate, but in the right hands, it's just another word for realignment of purpose. I'd love to hear your stories. Have you ever turned a setback into something stronger? Was there a moment when you realized you were done living by someone else's rules? Share it in the comments. Maybe your story will be the spark that gives someone else the courage to choose a different ending.